Hi, this is the first session of the unique Individualism, Egoism, Anarchy with the instructor Andrea Cetrulo. And I will present the program and then pass the microphone to her. And the description of the seminar. The seminar will delve into philosophies of anarchism and individualism that transcend or depart from the political and escape both identitarianism and collectivism. What does being individualistic, egoistic, and anarchic mean beyond common parlance? We will explore the existential autonomy of the anarch living outside of society and of social conformism through Max Stirner's The Unique, the silent wine drinker of Michel Serres, the recluse aesthete imagined by decadent writers J.K Huysmans and Baudelaire, and the Brazilian witch Pomba Gira. Individualism from these vantage points can be understood not only as a misadventure in fanciful delights, but as a necessary part of the process of self-extraction. We will also unveil how only in caring for ourselves can we begin to care for each other as singular equals and not as generic representatives of groups, classes, identities, and states. And now,
super.
Please, Andrea.
Yeah. Thank you, Leandra. Welcome, everyone. I'm happy that you didn't read my bio, because I have to say that that was more of a worker's bio than anything. And to evoke our figure of today, the fantastic Max Stirner, the bio was nothing more than another example of the uninteresting that is work, which passes for one's life work for the human calling. So I'm glad that didn't happen. So hopefully throughout the 4 sessions of this seminar, we will get to know each other as the uniques that we are, devoid of preconceptions and pre-made fabrications, to use Max Stirner's kind of vocabulary. So anyways, thank you everybody for being here today, tonight, wherever you are in the world. And a special thanks to my friend Adam Jones, who is my guest on this first seminar tonight. And he will be telling us more about this enigmatic, misunderstood, and often malinterpreted Max Stirner. So to give you a little bit of context, Adam and I met not too long ago, and since then have formed the sort of union of egoists to continue with Max Stirner's vocabulary, based on our mutual interest in Stirner's work and my own interest in the notions of individualism, egoism, and the anarchic, or the anarch. So these principles, although they are linked to politics, they're not political per se, which is something that I actually want to emphasize from the very beginning. So thank you everyone for choosing to join this temporary reunion of egoists. It is my pleasure to have been given the chance to have the space to share and explore these somewhat vilified notions, I guess, in a world precluded by identities and sacred scruples, which later we will be talking about. So yeah, for this session, Adam has selected the readings on Stirner and the section from his seminal work, The Unique and Its Property, which was published in 1845. I have also added another reading, which I'm not sure you guys had the time to, because then I realized today I was going through it and I was like, maybe this is too much, but if some of you have got to it, then that's great, which is the one on Etienne de la Boétie, which is titled The Politics of Obedience, Discourse, and Voluntary Servitude. And this was written when Etienne de la Boétie was 18 years old in mid-16th century France. He was close friends with Montaigne, Michel Montaigne. And he asked a fundamental question that many since then and before have asked, which is why people abide to servitude and allow for their oppression in favor of a higher social order or fiction, if you like. So I don't know if we will have time to cover this piece, but I'd like Adam to tell us how the devotee's argument or conclusion, more than argument, is in stark contrast with Max Stirner's thoughts on autonomy and its relation to property, which is something that Adam and I were actually discussing briefly. We touched on it yesterday. So yeah, that's kind of a little introduction to today's seminar. And then I would like to jump into the more kind of logistical part of this course. And Leandra, if there's anything I'm saying, because it's the first seminar I do here, if there's anything I'm saying that is incorrect, please jump in.
No, I just need to tell you that we need to read your bio because it's for the
okay. Well, go for it.
For the archives, the first session, you know.
Read it. I already said what I had to say, so okay.
Thank you. Andrea Cetrulo was program curator at Teatro Mundi. Andrea curates the live program of Making Cultural Infrastructure, as well as the sound archive and media content for all TM projects. She previously worked as a researcher in cultural policy organizations in London with projects in Europe and Latin America. She holds a master's degree in urban studies from University College London with a focus on the configuration of public space through music and sounds. Prior to moving to London, she studied in Berkeley and Barcelona, where she obtained her degree in sociology. Her interest in music is shared through a monthly show on an independent UK radio station.
That's Nude Station, actually. Who's interested? Nudes Radio.
And the special guest, Adam Jones, is a doctoral student at the Centre for Research in Modern European Philosophy at Kingston, University of London, working on the relationship between Stirner and Hegel, and Stirner's influence on contemporary forms of insurrectionary anarchism, particularly the tradition known as destituent power. Aidan also writes and co-hosts the philosophy podcast and seminar collective Acid Horizon, whose first book on cybernetics, Anti-Oculus, a philosophy of escape, released this year, and is a commissionary editor at the Zero Books, where he is working on upcoming titles such as his book, The New Flash, and a new introduction to Mark Fisher's thesis, Flatline Constructs, are due to be released in 2024. And that's it. Now, please let us know how you will conduct seminar and so on.
Super. So can I start with the logistics though? Or
okay, you know.
Yeah, so jumping to the logistics of this course, as you know, it's divided into 4 sessions. And I would like to take this opportunity to let you know that I have slightly tweaked the format to allow for your presentations to take place during the last seminar, which is on the 11th, I believe, of November. I think that's the last one, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so what does that mean? Basically, that you will be doing, we will be discussing your group presentations during the last session, which will need to be quite brief, as I was told that, and I can see that you're quite a few. But yeah, it would be an excellent opportunity. The reason why I tweaked it is because I believe it would be an excellent opportunity for us all to be able to see and discuss what you've all come up with. And the presentations will be uploaded in advance. Okay, some of you have probably done a seminar before, so you're aware of that. And what will happen on the last session is simply that we will discuss them and having all viewed them previously. So I will update the syllabus to reflect this change. And don't worry about there being less themes or materials. I will just kind of repackage it so that we can cover everything within the first 3 sessions, right? Including this one of the seminar. So as part of the evaluation, you will also need to submit, apart from the presentation, an individual essay, which should be uploaded within a couple of weeks after the the last session on November the 11th. So this is basically a piece engaging with any of the materials or several of them that we approach during the course, and then these will be marked. So yes, you're free to choose which text, what section even of a text you would like to focus on. So here, well, I would encourage you to write in whatever form you feel is most appropriate to bring out what the seminar has kind of, I guess, sparked or triggered in you, and would even encourage you to write in the form of questions rather than statements, or perhaps other formats, like shorter formats. I quite like short formats, so like image thoughts. I don't know if some of you are familiar with my friend Jason Mohagic's kind of approach, but I think that if you are familiar with this approach, I think that's kind of what I'm aiming for. So something that is a bit more condensed, but that has a kind of like impression. So basically impressions, even if not very long, of things that stood out or sparked some thought, right? So rather than statements or a conventional essay format. So yeah, Leandra, I believe attendance will also be a factor. It will be factored in and monitored by the moderator. I don't think I will be involved with that. Is that right? I think attendance also.
Yes, I think it's 20% of the.
20%.
Yeah, of the. It's a kind of a mathematical.
Okay, perfect.
Formula, you know?
This is all spelled out.
Yeah.
I assume a lot of you already know, but for me, as it's the first time, I just want to make sure that it's all clear from the beginning. And then, as I said, I will update the syllabus, and I will remain, open at your disposal if there are any answers, to answer any questions you may have. And I'm happy also to have a one-to-one with you if you'd like to discuss some ideas before you submit, which might be helpful and fun to do. So yeah, does anybody have any questions at this point? Don't think so. Okay, doesn't look like. So yeah, just let me know if you have any questions. Write to me, to Leandra, to Rafael directly, and we'll sort that. Okay, so let's get into it. I'd like to ask each of you to briefly say something about yourself, and more importantly, I'd like to hear about your motivations for joining this course, which will be very interesting to hear. And maybe we can start with you, Leandra. I believe you're a student at the New Center as well.
Yes, I'm a student, a certificate student at New Center. I came mostly from the music, experimental music and electronic music, but I also write and do some research, and I have a master's degree and a PhD in arts, and mostly investigating the relation with sound and multi-sensoriality. And I also have some political research that I'm starting now, based on it's a very dark aspect of politics that I want to be investigating. It's about the aesthetics and the mystics in the fascism and the ultra right movements around the world. And it's largely based on what has happened recently in Brazil and in other countries,
Right. Yeah, quite pertinent. Well, thank you, Andrea, for that. I'll just go around. I'll just go around my screen. It's Lauren Burns Cody. Lauren. I think you're muted. I can't hear you.
Is that better?
Yeah, perfect.
Hi, I'm in the certificate program for transdisciplinary studies. I'm also wrapping up a master's degree at the Center for Research in Modern European Philosophy in London. I'm just working on the dissertation now. I'm also an artist. And what was my motivation for joining this course? It's a hard question to answer right now, but just the general topic, and I don't have much familiarity with Stirner, so I would just really like to learn more about that.
Nice. Good starting point. Guido?
Hello. Sorry. I thought it's me. Hey, do you want to go first? Guido.
Yeah, I didn't know if you were referring to Gio or me, but I'll go first.
Guido.
So,
Guido.
Guido
Guido.
Guido or Guido, either way, it's fine.
That's great.
So I'm in Chicago. I studied art history at the Art Institute of Chicago. Against Nature is one of my favorite novels, so that kind of piqued my interest, and I've been meaning to read Stirner for a while, so figured it was time.
Wow. It's always exciting to hear that it's someone's favorite novel.
Yeah.
Me too. Alexandra. Sí, Alexandra.
Hello. I'm architect and I have masters in architecture and urban planning. The reason why I'm here, because I believe that today's architecture sometimes could be, without any ideas or philosophy beside it. And I'm trying to study some philosophical concepts and to educate myself in this field, to bring it into my projects. Some of them are like more material, some of them in virtual spaces like VR, AR projects. And I started to discover some anarchist writers like a year ago, and I read just a few, and I really enjoyed today's readings.
Oh,
So I'm looking forward to today's lesson.
nice. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Now Gio, yes.
I'm sorry about earlier. So yeah, I'm a filmmaker from the Philippines. I'm also a certificate student, transdisciplinary studies under Jason, and I'm currently, I restructured my whole project after a year at the new center. It's been very fruitful so far. So generally, I'm interested in motivated mainly by the political atmosphere here in the Philippines. This fascist regime, return of the son of, of dictatorship, basically, of the Marcoses, and the this particular law on terrorism, which puts activists or anyone else in grave danger. So yeah, basically it's my main concept, and I'm just very interested in the seminar. Very interesting. I'm excited. Thank you.
Nice. No, thank you. Andreas?
Yeah, hi. I'm a student at the University of Copenhagen in theology. And this course or seminar is part of 3 seminars I'm following at the new center as part of a exchange trip. Not really, but through these Zoom links. And I don't know much about the Stirner, but I'm interested in the rearrangement, or maybe a new approach that I'm unfamiliar with concerning ethics and moralism. Not anti or pro, but maybe a third approach. And yeah, maybe amoralist. I don't know, but I'm really interested in seeing what this has to offer.
Well, it sounds like you're in the right place. Aglaya?
I'm muted. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I'm also a certificate student on visual arts and curatorial studies here. Well, visual arts in general. Well, actually, just common curiosity brought me here. Like the title was very catchy, and I just see how it goes. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Well, if you want to, yeah, art historian, create everything in one person, and yeah, this is it.
That's enough. We'll get to know each other. We'll have time. And thank you. And Zach?
Yeah, hi. Oh, are there more than one Zachs? Oh, did you say Zach or Isaac?
Oh, Zach, you're Zach, right? Is it Zach?
I'm Zach, yes, yes,
I
yes.
see. No, Zach. Is there an Isaac too? Oh yeah, there's an Isaac.
Yes, yes, yes.
Zach.
Sorry. Yeah, hi. I'm a computer programmer I'm from Brooklyn. Yeah, for a long time I've been sort of interested in finding deeper connections between my work and sort of computer science and mathematics and various philosophical applications, which brought me to the New Center. And this course in particular, this seminar, I've sort of always been, I think I've probably always considered myself sort of very sympathetic to anarchism as a general political school of thought, but I would love to kind of deepen my understanding of its various sort of underpinnings and principles. So yeah, very excited to learn.
Yeah, thank you. Well, computer science is quite connected, so I think you will be able to. James?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. I'm James. I'm based in Glasgow at the minute in Scotland, and I'm a student on the Transdisciplinary Studies strand. I'm a little bit allergic to bios and introductions and so on, but I found the reading list for this course really compelling. There's some people that I recognize, some names I don't, and yeah, excited to learn.
May I ask which names you recognized? Is this me being curious?
No, of course, yeah. Jason, who I took a class with last semester, like Baudelaire and Serres as well. But I've never read the sort of founding fathers of anarchism or really engaged with, like, or even like, I've kind of came across things like the Anarch before, but not really engaged with it in a structured way. So interesting to see all these things kind of pulled together into one place.
Super. Ricardo?
Hey, hola. Yeah. Well, I know I'm in Mexico City. I'm an artist. I'm also a student of the Transdisciplinary certificate program. I'm teaching, and I guess that part of my interest of being here is that I'm at odds with the three things that I just said. Like, why am I these three things and not something else? So yeah, that's basically it. A certain crisis of relevance and irrelevance, and the I as device, you know, the paradox of being at the same time like very non-important in the scheme of things, and at the same time like the most important, you know, thing that we'd have at hand, like the individualistic society.
Yeah. Excellent.
So yeah, that's about it.
Super, thank you. Pradeep?
Hello. Yes, I'm from India. I am a student here in Transdisciplinary Studies. I'm also a designer. Apart from that, what brought me to this particular course was I once in probably my first year of my bachelor's degree, I was once in a colloquium writing a paper on anarchism, and my journey in anarchism sort of started there, and I left it somewhere way behind. I guess I started reading Chomsky, Bakunin, Kropotkin. I was I was sort of introduced to Stirner back then, but while reading him, I realized I did not understand him well back then. I always wanted to sort of get back to that feeling, and I was sort of amazed when this course was presented. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sounds
Yeah.
good. Thank you. Michel.
Hi, I'm Michelle. So I'm interested in I'm in the transdisciplinary studies certificate with Jason, and I've taken a few classes in the new center so far. I was interested in this specific class because I grew up in a very fundamentalist background, and I went to Brigham Young University for my undergrad, and now I'm at Maryland Institute College of Art for my master's. And so obedience has been really like entrenched in my upbringing. And so I'm really interested in kind of like the opposite of that and learning about it. So yeah.
Okay, well, interesting. Now, let's see. Anna? Thank you. Sure.
Hello, my name is Anna. I'm an artist and curator. I'm based in France right now. Mostly I'm interested in anarchist strategies, thinking mostly of cyber feminists and xenofeminist ones. And also I'm interested in interrelations of ethics and aesthetics. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Adam is your guy then. I think he's a bit more knowledgeable than I am in that realm.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Acid Horizon, I might say.
Oh, you're all here for Adam, aren't you? Great. Selma?
Hi, I'm Selma. I'm from Virginia. I'm also a certificate student in the Transdisciplinary Studies program. I'm a writer and I'm an artist. I'm interested in this course because I just think it's really timely. I think a lot of literature and art today deals with this topic and kind of the tension of like living in this time period with strong institutions, but then also disintegrating like structures of the past and how we're all as individuals like having to deal with that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Isaac? No, Isaac.
Hello, I'm also a certificate student for the art and curatorial program. I have a bachelor's in biology and marine biology from the University of Southampton. My research currently revolves around the ethics of modernization in indigenous tribes. And as I'm moving towards social sustainability as an aspect and not just ecological sustainability, I'm keen on understanding the main themes of this seminar. And I was also really intrigued from seeing Baudelaire in the readings, because it's someone that I have struggled to comprehend before. So I'm excited for that.
We'll see what we can do about that. Okay. Yana?
Hi everyone, I'm Yana. I'm currently based in Lithuania, doing the curatorial program here at the New Center. And I think I'm with Lauren here. I just found the subject very interesting. Not familiar much with the readings, so it will be a new space for me.
Great, thank you very much. Duncan.
Hi. I'm Duncan. I'm from Birmingham, even though I don't have a Birmingham accent. Basically, since doing my master's, actually done my undergrad, I met a PhD student who was doing a lot about Stirner and art and ethics. And since then, Stirner has been unavoidable for me. And so I've dabbled with Stirner. I picked it up pick them up every now and again. Never really fully engaged with it, though. I like a lot of ideas. Never really kind of fully delved in. So this is now like a good opportunity to do that. Really, that's basically it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like his name is floating around, but I feel like a lot of people have that same kind of approach, or have encountered him but not really delve into. So thank you, Duncan. And Jasmine. Hello.
Hello. My name's Jasmine. I'm based in Pasadena, California. I'm an artist and a writer and a certificate student in the Transdisciplinary Studies program. I've audited like a few seminars, but this is the first one that I'm taking as a student. So I'm very excited to kind of get a more expansive view of. I've read a bit of Stirner independently, but yeah, I'm excited to kind of go through it again in a more like discursive environment with other people.
Okay, well, it'll be a good experience for a seminar. Thank you, Jasmine. So Zach, are you appearing again on my screen? This is weird. Okay, well.
Yeah, I had to rejoin. I apologize for that.
Oh, don't worry. I was just like, I already. So Marco, please. Hi.
Hello, I'm Marco. Hello, everyone. I'm also a certificate student in art and curatorial practice. I studied history of art at Goldsmiths some years ago, and I'm also not familiar with Stirner, so I'm quite happy to be here. I'm curious.
Right. That's more than enough. Being curious. Matthias.
Hi, my name is Matthias. I'm speaking from France. I come from a background in literature, and I don't know, my camera is not working, right?
No, I can't see you.
Okay, I can't activate it. I don't know for what reason.
Don't worry, it doesn't work.
Okay, so I come from a background in literature and computer science and visual arts, and I've been interested mostly in like hyperpop music, the trope of the damsel in distress as an engaging figure with that music. And so kind of building like a portrait of the flaneuse, more of the flaneur from Baudelaire. And so that echoed somehow the syllabus.
Super. Thank you. I think we got Paula and Enrique left. So Paula.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Yes, I'm Paula. I'm currently based in Italy, but I'm Colombian. I come from fine arts. Then I did a master on curatorial practices, and I'm in the certificate program of curatorial practices. I'm here, yeah, because I'm interested in the themes and the authors, so curiosity. Yeah, my personal research is more focused on my background, so indigenous cultures and maybe the counterpoint between arts and crafts.
Arts and crafts, you said, yeah?
Yeah, because I also did design, so I think like indigenous cultures don't have this division of fine art, so I'm really interested on that, like when arts meet crafts and cosmology.
That's fantastic. Well, I have something for you. A friend of mine, Mia Fife, she's Colombian, and she has a project on crafts there on indigenous communities. It's called Fibra. I'll send you the link.
Thank you, please.
Sort of that. Sí, of course.
Gracias.
Enrique?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I'm a certificate student on the critical philosophy program, and my interest in Stirner is because my interest in the seminar first is because I read Stirner a long time ago, and then I saw this as an opportunity to engage with his concepts and his mode of thinking.
Can you repeat again? Because I didn't really quite catch it. What is it that you do?
I study history, and right now I'm trying to write some things of my own and trying to develop a research program for me to engage in a master's degree.
All right, yeah, gotcha. Thank you. I think we've gone through everyone, unless I'm missing. Am I missing someone? There's a second screen here. Oh, wow. Okay, we're more. So we got, yeah. We're quite a few. Maxim.
Hello, I'm Max. I'm living in Los Angeles. I'm doing computer programming professionally, but I have my personal interests in philosophy and psychology and such. So I took a class with Reza this summer class on David Hume. That was fun, so I wanted to explore more. And then New Research Center, I've read Stirner, I've read Huysmans Against Nature, and I love Baudelaire. Very painful that I can't read French originals, though. So that would be one thing to motivate myself to learn French, maybe.
Yeah,
So I'm very excited.
Yeah, it's definitely also the translation. Same with Stirner. That Adam will be talking about. The translation is a bit unfortunate. So yeah, it's always better. Even the title, like Against Nature. I don't know what Guido would say, but it's a little bit tricky if you think of the word in English, right? There's more, I guess, Against the Grain is a little bit better. Yeah, we'll get there. And now Irene.
Hi, thank you. I'm zooming in from the New York City section of Lenape-Hoking, homeland of the Lenape peoples. I'm a writer, an artist, an advisor to individual artists, NGOs, arts and cultural organizations like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where I specialize in representing the interests of pan-Indigenous communities found throughout New York City. I'm interested in this course for several reasons. I started reading Decadent poets and other writers when I was really young, and I didn't have anybody to discuss Against Nature when I was in middle school and getting really interested in symbolist art. And then secondly, I'm interested in hearing more about different anarchist thinkers because I have increasingly numerous colleagues that are invested in the concept of indigenous anarchism, particularly from the Navajo Nation and elsewhere. Thank you. Pass.
Oh wow, how exciting. Everyone here, amazing, so cool. I'm lucky to be here, really. Rin?
Hi, my name is Rin, and I'm from Korea, currently based in Brooklyn, and I'm a multimedia researcher and a student doing a certificate program at New School, the New Center for Research and Practice, and I'm also a documentary filmmaker and a tattoo artist. But Stirner has been one of my biggest influences and inspirations theoretically my whole life, so I always am happy to study more about Stirner and like post-left anarchism and stuff. So I wanted to see what I can get from this seminar, and I also wanted to have more opportunity to discuss it with other people as well. So that's why I enrolled.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I think we got to everyone right now. Second, yeah, that should be everyone. So yeah, before I pass the mic to Adam and we start the seminar, I'd like to read a passage from Stirner's Critics, which I guess you all have read, that I think somehow summarize some of the themes and approach to this seminar, especially in relation to the egoist. So quote, "The exclusiveness of the egoist, which some want to pass off as isolation, separation, loneliness, is on the contrary full participation in the interesting by exclusion of the uninteresting." Now, Adam, maybe this is a good starting point to talk about Max and his own interests. So yeah, would you like to start off by telling us what drew you to this rather peculiar character and why we should also be interested in his work?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks everyone for having me. But yeah, let's just start off with Stirner, because Stirner's interesting for me first and foremost because there's a kind of sort of tradition of reading Stirner that presents him as a kind of sort of outcome of Hegelianism. So when I first started reading Stirner, I was sort of card-carrying sort of Hegelian. It doesn't quite work, this thesis, but there's a sense in which Stirner is kind of this consummate nihilist, consummate anarchist, kind of Nietzsche for people who don't really want to read Nietzsche. He actually precedes Nietzsche by a few decades. And I think there's many themes in Nietzsche, for example, a critique of the hidden egoism of altruism, a critique of Christianity and its as a sort of latent kind of resentment or repressive kind of force that you eventually find in the work of Nietzsche, which you do get in this book. But in terms of what I'm going to talk to you guys about today, I really want to talk about sort of what this book actually is and what its function is. Because a lot of the times this book is presented as a kind of a systematic text, a system of anarchism. What this book is a selection of witty responses to arguments that he had at the pub. And I'm going to sort of use the actual context in which he wrote this book to explain two of the real sort of terms in the reading that me and Andrea selected for this, because it begins the section we highlighted with a discussion of the nature of truth. And there are some technical terms in this text which don't sound very technical to us now, but are very technical to the kind of debates that Stirner is intervening in with this book. So the terms really I want to focus on are criticism and humanism. And in order to explain what those are in relation to truth and the egoism as a revolt against truth, or even a revolt against philosophy, we need to go back to this idea of truth and how he relates to it, and particularly the kind of debates that Stirner was having at the time. So yeah, Stirner writes this book in around 1843 to 1844. He is commonly associated with a group called the Young Hegelians, the Left Hegelians. And in order to explain what Stirner's doing, I kind of have to give a bit of a history of what Young Hegelianism was as a historical and intellectual movement. So it really comes into its play around essentially, the timeline is this. Hegel dies from cholera in Berlin. And then at the same time, there's a great movement amongst the philosophical sort of allegiances around the universities in Germany, particularly Prussia, in the early to mid 1800s, to get rid of Hegelianism. The king of Prussia sends in the philosopher Schelling to, quote, excoriate the dragon seed of Hegelian pantheism from universities. And in response to this, Hegelianism as a school of thought fractures into two different sides. So we have the right Hegelians, or we call them the right Hegelians now. These were essentially a collection of Hegelian philosophers that thought they could use Hegel's system, which we don't need to get into now, to essentially defend the present order of things in Germany at that time. And one of the things they were defending it against is the charge of pantheism and the charge of atheism, essentially that Hegel's system was incompatible with Christianity. Now, that this is a question at all came about because there were some sort of more radical Hegelian writers who tried to use Hegel's philosophy to disprove the metaphysical reality or truth of the biblical narrative, the narrative of the Gospels. And the first book of this was by a man called David Strauss. It was called The Life of Jesus Critically Examined. And it essentially said that using dialectics, more or less, we can see historically, critically, that these miracles didn't happen. Jesus wasn't a historical figure. This causes a great sort of storm in Germany at the time. I think even Nietzsche, in his younger days, hangs out with Strauss and gets some of his anti-Christian inclinations from him. But in response to this book, the right Hegelians send sort of one of their rising stars to kind and refute David Strauss. Now, this name of this rising star is a man called Bruno Bauer, who you may know as the person who Marx is responding to in the text on the Jewish question, and who is one of the main antagonists of the unique and its property. So what he does is he goes in, and this guy is a proper rising star of Hegelianism. He edits in 1827 Hegel's Lectures on Religion, the second edition, and what he does is he sets out to prove the philosophical, metaphysical truth of the biblical narrative. And the way he does this is by using Hegel's logic. And the problem is that he succeeds with this. He succeeds in demonstrating dialectically, through a dialectic of self-consciousness that goes throughout human history, that Christianity has its truth in this dialectical reasoning. The problem is that makes the Bible dependent on dialectics, not dialectics dependent on the Bible. And in doing so, he has this huge Damascene conversion, where he starts to believe that the essence of the biblical narrative, the religious truth, is actually human self-consciousness, which proves it. It's all located in self-consciousness, and he sees it now as the task of people like him to do biblical criticism on the religious ideology of Germany at the time, and then reveal the humanity underneath it. And he presents this as a kind of religious, not religious, a kind of a revolutionary war. So following this, he writes a book called The Trumpet of the Last Judgment Against Hegel, the Atheist and Antichrist, about essentially how by doing biblical criticism in this intellectual way, you are essentially doing the French Revolution. You are terrorizing the ideological and religious content out of the Prussian state, out of Germany, and therefore providing a real threat to its foundations. Now, this doesn't win him many favors amongst the right Hegelians. He gets sacked from his job very quickly, very quickly. However, he is a radicalizer. He radicalizes a lot of students with him. And some other people in the academia at this time are coming to the same conclusion. That is, we have to critically analyze in this kind of proto-new atheism kind of movement the roots of religiosity in Germany, and through that we will then drop the scale from people's eyes, and they will rise up in revolt against the Christian German state of Prussia. Similarly, we have at the same time we have the writings of a man called Ludwig Feuerbach, who many of you know from Marx's Theses on Feuerbach. And Feuerbach has the same conclusion. He thinks that behind the essence of God, God is just human qualities we abstract from ourselves and place out in the alien world above us. All we need to do is to cancel that difference, that alienation between God and man, and we can overthrow the existing order of things for humanity's sake rather than for God's sake. And so Bruno Bauer and Ludwig Feuerbach hit it off quite a bit, and they start radicalizing students, radicalizing other professors. The professors all get sacked, as you could probably imagine, in Germany at this time. And so they all start having they need somewhere to congregate to discuss these ideas. And so they essentially start a debating club on Friedrichstrasse in Berlin, in a wine bar called Hippel's. And in the back room, they spend all of their time arguing. And I mean, like, not arguing in the sense of, a pleasant debate club, but really tearing chunks out of each other about how basically what they're doing is a kind of a collective struggle session. So they'll be constantly goading each other on, saying, you're still secretly Christian, you need to do self-criticism, you haven't fully accepted, that actually everything you believe is an alienated version of your own humanity, and they just keep tearing chunks out of each other for about 3 or 4 years. Now, one of the people in this debate society, well, this collective of intellectual sparring, is Max Stirner. If you see this famous drawing of the young Hegelians that Engels does, you can see them all sort of, yelling at each other across the bar with drinks in hand. And Max Stirner is looking out at these two camps, these critical atheists and these revolutionary humanists, and he sees them as essentially just replacing new forms of domination with the other. And this is why he's talking about criticism here and talking about humanism, because the main enemy of the unique and its property is a kind of revolutionary criticism and a revolutionary humanism. The reason why these are the enemies of Stirner is because, for example, in the case of humanism and Feuerbach, who also writes a big response to Stirner, which he responds to in turn in Stirner's Critics, is that we need to make the human essence the principle, the arche of all human existence. Everyone needs to serve the higher essence of man, the species essence. And Marx is very fond of this at the time, until he breaks with Feuerbach later on in his Theses on Feuerbach. And Stirner reads this as, we are replacing one essence with another. The problem is not simply the nature of the principle, but the existence of principles themselves. Essentially, his entire problem is with the idea of essence as such. The idea that an essence becomes a commanding principle that we are to aspire to, and that we are incomplete as human beings insofar as we do not make that principle our own. In a way, we serve the principle, and we try to serve ourselves through serving principles like humanism, like self-criticism. And all they do is essentially diminish us, diminish our capacities, and become a kind of, for him, and ultimately a waste of the finite time we have on this earth, because we will never embody the total human essence. We will never be purged of all of our intellectual sort of vices. And to this end, he writes, the unique and its property, der Einzige und sein Eigentum. Literally the only one and its estate. And so this is why he's talking about truth and criticism in the selection we had here. But that's just a bit of a background, the history of the young Hegelians, why he's writing this. But I think it's important to know why he's writing this insofar as he's not giving a system. He's not giving a philosophy of the anarchic. For Stirner, there is no philosophy of the anarchic, because philosophy, insofar as in his time, philosophy was always a process of crafting identities between the universal and the particular, between the essential and the non-essential, and this is the essence of dialectics. There's always a fundamental violence to it, a violence of the map superimposing itself on the territory and leading it to domination. And he sees this in a very material sense, actually, because there's this distinction that arises in the selection we assigned between what he calls servile criticism or free and true criticism and what he calls own criticism. The structure of servile criticism is basically what we would call criticism today. The idea that we have a criterion in thoughts, we approach the object of we want to know or criticize or test according to that criterion, and if there is a contradiction between what the thing is identified as in our criterion of understanding it and the thing itself, we therefore prove a contradiction, therefore we say that there is something defective about it. And Stirner's ultimate problem with this is that it takes thoughts as existing on their own terms, whereas ultimately there is something unthinkable about our experience, or at least not fixable into a fixed principle, concept, and that is going to be the Einzige. It's going to be particularity itself, raw particularity. There's a great line from Adorno's Negative Dialectics where he says that the concept of particularity does not subsume any particular itself, because it's the concept of particularity is itself universal. And this unique is essentially going to be this total affirmation of an unknowable dark ground, or at least something that's unknowable for philosophy, insofar as philosophy tries to fix things down, to map out the territory of experience and categorize it, and in doing so capture it. Philosophy for Stirner is something like a counterinsurgency ultimately. It's writing a map across a territory in order to occupy it and to striate its spaces. But I mean, rather than go too far into sort of an index of concepts, which we can get into in more of a Q&A sense, the main concepts of Stirner's are really going to be this idea of the unique, which I think I struggle to call it a concept. The reason why I think it struggles to call it a concept is because, as he says in Stirner's Critics, what Stirner says is a concept, a word, Einzige, unique. But what he means cannot be said. So we're going to struggle with this term, the unique, insofar as we try to think about it on the level of meaning or the level of reference. What does the unique refer to? I think that misses the mark. So I think we need to think about these things more in terms of what the unique does, what the uniqueness affirms insofar as you start to affirm it. And I think one way to think about this affirmation of the unique is refusal. It is a refusal to identify yourself. It is a refusal to provide oneself with an essence or principle for whoever is asking. And usually, and there's a great quote, I think, from Deleuze and Guerry's book, The Productive Body, which is that the one who asks after identity is usually the one who guards property. And for Stirner, property is a very interesting category because, and this is a quote which isn't in the reading, property for Stirner has nothing to do with things. It is a very interesting reading of property. It is a total rejection of the history of property as a concept as we understand it on the basis of the anarchy of Stirner. So here's a quote from Stirner. "But my property is not a thing, as this has an existence independent of me. Only my power is my own. Not this tree, but my power over it, or my capability to dispose of it, is what is mine. Now, how does one express this power in a wrong way? People say I have a right to this tree, or it is my rightful property. So I have gained it through power, that the power must persist, so that the tree may also be held, or better, that the power is not a thing existing in itself, but has existence only in the powerful I, in me, the powerful one, is forgotten. Power, like my other characteristics, such as humanity, majesty, etc., is elevated to something existing in itself, so that it still exists long after it has ceased to be my power. Thus turned into a ghost, power is right. Things now actually don't belong to me, but to right. Now, this rejection of right put Stirner outside of the entire history of German philosophy up until now. Any sort of link between himself and the Hegelians is out the window by this point. You reject right, you reject objective spirit, you reject Hegelianism, you are kind of out of the milieu of every German thinker in Berlin in the 1830s and onwards. But just to clarify what this rejection of right stands for, is that the theory of property in Germany at the time is always reducible to rights. Essentially, in Hegel, and this is where the philosophy of right is really taking off at this point, one exists as a subject with free will, and one expresses that free will and confirms it and consummates it to oneself by taking ownership of the world. You take ownership of objects, and they reflect back to you your capacity to appropriate and to own. Your personhood shines back to you for objects. It's a knowledge problem. Property for Hegel solves the problem of self-consciousness in terms of giving you a concept of yourself as a person. Stirner is not interested in personhood in this sense, not in the sense that it's a legal category typically deriving from the 17th century or from Roman schemas of law, which find their sort of continuation in the Holy Roman Empire, which by the time Stirner's writing has been dead for about 26 years or so. Right for Stirner is spectral. Because it's the idea that, you know, I implant myself in this thing, my personhood, my concept of myself, and then it exists there. It just stays there. Like there's an imprint of my personality, like my essence is there. And yet for Stirner, we have no essence. No essence truly captures us. And so this is more of a social construction, might be a bit of a modern way to put it, but it is nonetheless a fallacy of giving things over to an essence of right. Right in German, Recht, meaning both law and right in the sense of human rights, property rights. These for Stirner are ultimately not necessarily fantasy, or they're fantasies, but they are also they are products of a mode of subjection, which forces us to take the interests of abstract ideals as if they were our own. We can only serve ourselves through serving them. And this brings us, of course, to the idea of the most famous idea of Stirner's, which is the spook. Das Spook, literally, or Gespenster, spectre. Now, the definition of the spook from Stirner is that it is an idea which has subjected people to itself. This is where the charge of idealism usually shows up in discussions of Stirner, but I'd like to just clarify actually a little bit on how the process of possession, as he calls it, Besetzung, sort of shows up. To have a fixed idea is not to be captured in a kind of, spectral way as if these ideas really existed as floating entities. This is what I think Marx and Engels get a bit wrong about Stirner. Rather, it is the process of being made into a subject, because the beginning of this book starts off with a section called A Man's Life, mentioned even. And it's about how the child's sort of immediate inclinations to, eat, to sort of pursue its own ends, are captured by essentially the parent and by the institutions around it, and a dominating objectivity. And what dominating objectivity does to people, to humans, to children especially, is, for Stirner, it inserts principles that act as kind of negative feedback, regulatory sort of devices, which mediate between the embodied desire of the person and their wider social outcomes. I mean, one of the examples he gives is the policing of sexual desire, where one prays essentially instead of masturbating. He says, there's like an ideological insert between the two, and one nonetheless feels gratified for having pursued the higher order, the higher principle. And this is also good because he calls it the position of being subjected, of having a fixed idea imposed on you, is a position of becoming, in German, an Untertaner, like an underdoer, an actual subject, going back to the Latin subjectum, which is literally placed under. So to have a fixed idea is not to be possessed by a spooky little ghost somewhere, but rather it is to have an ideological device sort of essentially implanted from you, from sort of the dominating objectivity of the world into one's psyche and into one's own embodied relationship. Because Stirner's embodiment is very central to his anarchism, because it's only when one affirms the embodied immediacy of existence that one does not find any concepts lingering there, or at least one finds something that exceeds the concept. There's a kind of a baseness, a base materialism to it. And to go back, it's precisely this baseness which brings us back to criticism. What the idea of own criticism. For own criticism, eigener criticism, presupposes for its criterion not ideas in themselves, not identities, not intellectual critique for its own sake, because he doesn't believe anything is done for its own sake, but rather it presupposes, and this is a quote from page 367, I, the unspeakable, which is therefore not merely something thought, because what is merely thought is always speakable, since thought and word come inside. True is what is mine, untrue is that whose own I am. True, for example, the association, which is his mutual sort of union of egoists. Untrue, the state and society. Free and true criticism provides for the consistent domination of thought, an idea, a spirit. Own criticism for nothing but my self-enjoyment. Now, self-enjoyment is another technical term, and I think I'll conclude it on that last technical term of technical terms, and then we can sort of blow it open for Q&A. Self-enjoyment in Stirner, the German is Selbstgenuss, which also means something like self-consumption, self-use. He says that self-consumption, Selbstgenuss, is using life up, squandering it. And I think this is another way to understand his egoism too. Because self-enjoyment is not an act which you sort of do anyway. So it's not an act which one necessarily has to always do consciously, but is the coming to consciousness of egoism which allows self-enjoyment to have a new kind of autonomy or sovereignty to it. Because the process of self-enjoyment is basically, it's founded upon the idea that as finite beings, we are constantly losing the finite time of our lives by our very existence. You're gonna lose it anyway. It's all constantly flowing out. Loss is a matter of simple temporality. And therefore, how you spend your time is a matter of political and personal sovereignty, or political. And I mean sovereignty here in the sort of sense that you get someone like Bataille, just consuming, choosing the direction of loss. And so self-enjoyment for Stirner is going to be about how we use our time on this earth, how we use our finite time, and also on the basis of that, how we direct our finite energies, which we can multiply through, working collectively, or we can, slave away, or his version would be slaving away in subjection to giving what little time we have to ideals which are ultimately unrealizable. We can serve God for our beatification. We can serve the human being for the perfection of the species, but you will never be that for Stirner. It's kind of it's a failed thought. It's a bad infinity, as he would put it. As Hegel would put it, not he. He's not a fan of Hegel. People like to think he's a Hegel fan, but he describes Hegel as he says it's thought's most giant violence and domination. But let's bracket that out there. So just to round off on self-enjoyment, which would be the final sort of the big concepts, it is the purposeful squandering of life. It is an autonomy over the finite space of using life, which nonetheless fully affirms that it will never be captured by that which tries to make it redirect its life somewhere else. The anarchy of Max Stirner is ultimately a strategy of refusal. It is not so much a positive system. He will not give prescriptions, but rather he will try to find ways of refusing identifying yourself before philosophy and identifying yourself before concepts, ways of trying to embrace the embodiment of existence that is not lived through concepts, although you can process it conceptually in order to embolden yourself or develop yourself. And it risks a kind of ironism. I completely get that. But nonetheless, insofar as Stirner does not consider himself only intellectually, only in terms of an identity, to be unique is not to have an identity, but to realize the excess of identity. It's not, the uniqueness isn't inclusive to you, it's exclusive to everyone. and that requires a refounding of the encounter that makes politics possible. There's a big critique of society in Stirner. It derives it's mostly actually an etymological critique, because in German society is a Gesellschaft, literally and it comes from the root, the German Saal, for like a hall, a meeting place. And so Gesellschaft would be something literally, if you want to break it up literally, it'd be like having come together to make this meeting place. And the making is the part of it, because the shaft, the past tense for Ge. And he says, the thing about Gesellschaft is that it presupposes the existence of essentially the hall, the meeting place, the architecture of society is what holds us in common. But what he wants it to be more in the sense of we hold in common the space, rather than us being held in common by it. He's trying to undermine the presuppositions and the architecture of the way we think about ourselves conceptually, politically, and philosophically. And the best image I give of that in my work is very similar to the Toul prison revolt in 1972, where rather than escaping the prison, they throw all the guards out, they lock themselves in, and essentially deactivate the prison from ever escaping the bars of the cells by completely deinstituting, destituting, destroying the inside, and therefore making their demands as a collective, because they stop conforming to the essence of prisonly conduct, and therefore can finally act with autonomy beyond that. But I'll leave that there.
Thank you, Adam. That was a fantastic explanation of the unique, which is a very, as you described, elusive term. It's almost like embodied, isn't it? I mean, you can't really conceptualize it because it's ineffable. I think that's kind of the word probably to describe it. But yeah, I was just thinking as you spoke about this figure, or how could we call it? Let's just say the unique, and how it kind of possesses the freedom that is a prerequisite for the formation of true autonomy, if that makes sense. So let's say that the recipe for the unique, in a way, would be to provide the freedom for individuals to become privately monarchic, if you like, so autocratic. And that's what interests me as well, and what will recur in a way throughout the seminars. This is my interpretation, but I would like to hear from other people as well. Okay, I can see 2 hands at the moment. Yeah, so Michel, you're first on my screen.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying, Adam, about the unique and time and the finite nature of time. In America, we have this insane policy right now. It's like people think there can be limitless growth on like a finite planet, and economic and social and all the things. But yeah, and I remember when I was growing up, I counted out all the hours where I was like indoctrinated into Mormonism, like not even immersion hours, just like the actual like classes, and it was 18,000 hours. And I was like, that is a doctorate. and like an involuntary doctorate. And that's something that I think is really beneficial to like to the discussion about sovereignty and like and self-determination, is like this idea of the unique, and like I was wondering if there was something you'd like to say about this idea of like the child, which is a little bit more about my research, and like and how that relates to like the uniqueness of like the ownership of like being a child of a deity, and how that works with the philosophers we're studying. But yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, so there's something in the paper I wrote on the Einziger, which I presented at the first Stirner symposium, which is all on YouTube now, actually. But there's a history in the ways of the education of children, particularly disabled children, particularly a work which comes out couple of years after this book does, actually, by a guy called Edward Seguin, I can't remember who it was. And what's interesting is looking at the history of the books that try to educate disabled children in a very sort of ableist sort of context. And the term is used for the child is, and the disabled child is presented as an anarchist. An anarchist who is to be sort of disciplined and brought under a certain kind of arche, a certain kind of commandment. And Stirner himself was a teacher. He taught in a girls' school for a bit. His first excellent paper, which I translated, it's like a school document, was called On School Rules, and about very classical Hegelian kind of, the teacher brings out the child from their shell, the idea of development as literally de-enveloping, the analogy of a bud unfolding itself into a flower. But he really switches up from this a year or so before writing this book with a paper, which is, these are all free online, called The False Principle of Our Education, where he says, why don't we teach people to become fellow creators and fellow workers? When will the spirit of resistance, I think he says, I can't remember the German, be cultivated in us? And Stirner rejects his position as a teacher because he sees it as ultimately being something akin to indoctrination, or fundamentally a capture of people's innate, I can't say innate selfishness, but Stirner's not really a thinker of selfishness. He has a critique of selfishness actually at one point, but just get to your point really. He thinks that the process of child education generally isn't necessarily bad. He doesn't think education is something you need to get rid of. It's just that it is too much for the ends of subjection. It cultivates within us the logic of the objectivity around it, such that even when children try to escape sort of the immediacy of the rods, having to sing hymns in church, what is waiting for them on the other side of the immediate objects is the rationality, the ideals behind them. And then, oh shit, they go behind the particular and they get the universal on the other side of it. And so I think it really is for him a means of avoiding capture and also, to an extent, diagnosing it. And I think the child he's not necessarily a partisan of the child, but the anarchy of the child, particularly as something which is born into this world without these conceptions of itself, without these literal concepts of regulating all of its behavior, sort of demonstrates not the futility, but the inherent errancy which escapes those concepts.
Thank you. That was so great. I'm actually an award-winning special education teacher, and I was a disabled kid. And so I just published an essay with Massachusetts Review on how my disability led to my anarchy from Mormonism. So yeah, as a kid. So yeah, thank you so much.
No problem at all. It's great to hear.
Thank you. Now, Maxime, Andreas, and Alexandra have their hand up. Maxime.
Oh, I can get easily overexcited, so please moderate me if I like what Adam said, that Stirner is not systematic. Yeah, I think it's clearly not systematic writing. It's purely rhetorical. Rhetoric is very dense. It's very smart, obviously very sharp, but it's a singular rhetorical device that he's just expanding on. And the device is basically to frame everything, saying that this is my, if you talk about politics, you say it's fine to have political views as long as this is my politics. I'm not controlled by it. I am in control of it, or I have kind of possessive relationship to it. And same with religion. It's fine to have religious views or religious practices, whatever, as long as this is my religion. It's fine to have an iPhone if it's my iPhone, if it's not something that controls me. So this is pretty much cool, and it's a very powerful rhetoric, and he is a brilliant writer, even in English translation, however kind of cringy it is. And there is a naive counter argument, which is easily dismissible, that, like he would say, this is my Zoom call, so I'm taken over and I'm gonna just ignore other people. That is not what he's saying, because I'm still a reasonable person. I know that exactly because it is my Zoom call, I'm trying to get something out of it, and being an asshole would not help me to do that. So he's not promoting this naive attitude of everything belongs to me, I'm just possessive of everybody, I'm just taking control over everything. That's something that people attribute to Stirner, but that's not what he's saying at all. but I'm trying to wrap it up honestly. But I think with the point where rhetoric really breaks, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I think it connects, is that there's this beautiful quote from Baudelaire from his letter to his mother, where apparently he wrote, "Believe that I belong to you absolutely, and that I belong only to you." And this is so painful because he's kind of with this, and it's in his poetry, this painful codependency, obsession, despair. He's kind of arguing against Stirnerian existential scheme when Stirner has this kind of existential topology that consists basically of one point in empty space. And yeah, you can't pin it down, it's kind of keep running away from you, but it's still a singular point in kind of a space that's empty. But Baudelaire is presenting it as, no, our existential topology is that we are a body in presence of field of gravity of another body. So we always have this kind of codependent relationship, oppressed by something existentially, not politically, not just psychologically. And I'm throwing it out. I know that is kind of dense speech, but I'm trying to kind of navigate this understanding, like, where does this rhetoric break actually? It feels like it's not, we cannot actually do what he's saying. It sounds cool, it sounds very powerful, it captures attention, but again, doesn't this already feel like kind of we possessed by something rhetorically? So I'm trying to kind of throw it out, and yeah, I'm gonna stop here.
Thank you, Maxime. Go for it.
I mean, I mean, in terms of speaking about the idea of the spook, I mean, so are we being recaptured with a principle of egoism? I guess, insofar as it's very difficult to do what Max Stirner is telling us to do. But one of the big frustrations of this book is how little he tells us to do, and to an extent of which, because I think this all goes back to something which I didn't actually talk about, which I really should have, which is what it means to things to be mine, as Maxim was talking about. Mineness is really what Stirner would call ownness or Eigenheit. Now, what is Eigenheit? It is to be in. It is what is my property. It is, well, what is my own? What is my property? What is my property? Well, I gave a definition of what property isn't, I guess, in rejection of right. But what is my property? And he says my power, marked, so might. Now, he's not saying that might is right, because if you start saying that, you get into some, because he's rejecting right here. And what's interesting about Stirner as well is that he doesn't give a single standard of power, which I think gets him out of some very big difficulties. Because if you start talking, he does start talking about capacity, but if you start talking about capacity and quantifying it, we're getting into proper Hegelian skull measuring territory, IQ stuff. Luckily, he seems to reject that. He doesn't give a criterion of power. But nonetheless, he thinks that mindness is basically to be empowered in that singular point at any moment. So to make something your own is to be empowered by it. To be diminished by it is for it not to be your own. It's for it to stand against you. And when it comes to the idea of power itself, the thing about power for Stirner is that he can't really tell us what to do with power, because power speaks only in its. He has a theory of force in this book. He says force is nothing but the manifestation of force. And he says that it's kind of, it doesn't make any sense to say to someone, you should have done more of this, because if they could have done more, they would have. And it's that force is nothing but its manifestation. And therefore, you can't really sort of quantify it or try and predict it or command it with an arche in advance. And I think this actually feeds quite a lot into the question of what is to be done, because he can't prescribe anything. By his own logic, he can't prescribe anything. It's very similar to sort of a question of, because he talks about a revolutionary subject in this text, and that's the workers. He says, the workers have the most power in their hands if they were to know it and seize it. And the state, if labor becomes free, the state is lost. Now, Marx has a critique of that, but only in a very sort of epistemological thing. But what he sort of means by that is ultimately, power doesn't really speak in a sense of, in its from a sort of subaltern mode. What I mean by this is that the proletariat don't need to come to you with a lovely argument about how they have the right to all they create. The proletariat speak when you don't have a port anymore. The proletariat speak, the workers speak through the power of an expression of it, not because they go up with a nice list of demands and saying, I have the right to do this. The insurrection is precisely that, which is a self-organization which does not care for right and only just forced multiplication of powers, such that each person empowers the other, and therefore each becomes. That's how in the union of egoists, it is all the own. It is all the own because it's a matter of property is empowerment, and therefore property is empowerment, and property is ownness because ownness is empowerment. And so, in terms of what is to be done, it is ultimately this aspect of trying to multiply the forces at one's disposal in consummation with a kind of desire against domination. Does he give much more than that? I mean, this has been the whole problem of anything that comes after this. Politically, this book doesn't have much of an impact, apart from in some really interesting corners. So the first gay magazine in Europe was called Der Eigener, the owner. Dora Marsden, a very early suffragette, she in Britain, she writes a periodical called The New Free Woman, and then she writes another one called The Egoist. There are Japanese anarchists who reach Stirner. There are debates between egoists and sort of anarchist communists in the Bavarian Socialist Republic. If you read the works of someone like Gustav Landauer, it's very apparent there. But it doesn't have a very strong political history of movements. You can't put Stirner on a banner, which for some is the attraction, and also for some the ultimate sort of uselessness of it.
Yeah, that's very true. And I I was just thinking as you spoke about, this kind of new rhetoric, which we also find in the left, I would say, especially part of, that is like the concept of community, and how, the poor working class people should be a community or a commune or come together. And this is also another kind of spook in a way, because, why does that need to be the case? Because you are a working class person, because you are poor, you need to be in a community by default. It's very tricky. I think that kind of opposes in a way this sort of like monarchic approach that I was trying to explain before. But yeah, let's give space to the rest. Andreas?
Yeah, hi. I have two questions. The first concerns the concepts, non-concepts that you, Adam, just went through briefly. It seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the construction of the unique is more of a practice. So it's how they actualize it. It's a question of actualization more than theory, maybe. Maybe you can help me with this. What I thought of was first the concepts of Aristotle and the distinction between praxis and poiesis. I mean, doing something where the worth is already in the actualization, in the practice of it, or doing something with a target in the head. I mean, with the goal in mind for the practice that you are doing. Does it relate to any of these distinctions in the value of constructing this unique? And by this, I mean also, is the construction or the practice of the unique going before or after a criticism of the spook or of authority, of society? Is it a construction that you do out of bravery in front of it? Or is it more of a without, like an experience, a trace left by removing the spook from the unique, like a Blanchot or maybe Derrida thought of the trace? This brings me then to the other question, which would be, maybe it's also closely related to what Maxime said. I'm not sure I understood it in this way, but maybe it is. My question here would then be, where does the I begin and where does it end? And how can I be sure that the interest I feel or the power I feel, how can I determine it as my own? And in this process, how do I avoid making it into some sort of strive for negative purity, non-principles, non-ideals that I then, put in front of me as a new kind of metaphysics? yes, that was it.
So you've hit on one of the big problems. Well, the big problems, one of the big objections that is raised to Stirner. Particularly, this is the objection that Marx and Engels raised to Stirner in the German ideology, because this is the idea of what they call the egoist in agreement with himself, and they say that one of the things that is really good. I mean, if anyone's into Stirner and they haven't read the German ideology, read it, because it's a brilliant book. It's probably Marx and Engels' most anarchic book, because their response to Stirner is they say that he doesn't want to abolish enough things, and then they call him a cop. And this is the response. So they say that, look, if you can't commit to anything, if you're constantly looking in yourself to find any commitment and you think it's a spook and you throw it out, you're just doing a secret police state. You've reinvented Protestantism here, Stirner. This is not practical. And sort of the response to that, so I give in some of my work, is that if Stirner was doing that, it would completely hit the mark, absolutely. And there's been a lot of readers of Stirner who have betrayed him like this. But I think insofar as what that presupposes is that an egoistic critique would be one that would be purely intellectual. That would basically mean, am I fitting the identity of egoism? Am I being properly consciously egoistic? Am I in agreement with myself, with the concept of myself? And I think this is the mark insofar as it participates in exactly this idea of servile criticism that takes the concept of the egoist as existing on its own part, whereas I think the idea of own criticism, which takes the unnameability, the non-conceptuality of the self, takes you out of that. You can use thoughts to navigate this, but it becomes more of a pragmatic aspect. It's very close to Marx's 11 Thesis on Feuerbach. The philosophers have hitherto interpreted the I. The point is to change it. I mean, I think to that extent, Stirner doesn't give us any sort of process of deprogramming. I mean, he's trying to get away from that. In Berlin, Bauer and Feuerbach, they're constantly going, we need to deprogram the Christianity out of ourselves. And they're doing this thing that as you spoke, like constantly trying to purge themselves. And he doesn't want to have any part of that, because he doesn't want to reduce himself to an identity between a concept which he is to become. And that's why I think, in response to your first question, that the unique isn't something you can construct. It's more of a what Schelling would call a dark ground, a presupposition of all presuppositions, that there is an embodied self before concepts are mapped out onto it. I mean, there's a great phrase from, I think it comes up in both Spinoza and in the work of Alexandra Kojève, which is, the concept of dog is not canine. The concept kills dog, it's an abstraction from it. And I think rather than the unique being something to be constructed, it is essentially going to be this 0 point, this circuit breaker of constantly trying to adequate oneself to identifying with essences or concepts. And insofar it is already actual, it is not something which necessarily we have to be conscious of all the time. I mean, there's a great quote from Stirner's critics. Let me just grab that, actually, which really gets out of this idea that the unique is something you have to be conscious of. I am being unique here. No, it's actually, the unique is one of the very means by which we can consume ourselves. We can change ourselves. We can be malleable. And here's the quote from Stirner's critics. Everything turns around you. You are the center of the outer world and of the thought world. Your world extends as far as your capacity, that is what empowers you, and what you grasp is your own, simply because you grasp it. You, the unique, are the unique only together with your property, what is empowered, your characteristics. Quote, meanwhile, it doesn't escape you that what is yours is still itself its own at the same time, i.e. it has its own existence, it is unique the same as you. At this point, you forget yourself in sweet self-forgetfulness. But when you forget yourself, do you then disappear? When you don't think of yourself, have you utterly ceased to exist? When you look in your friend's eyes, or reflect upon the joy you would like to bring him, when you gaze up at the stars, meditate upon their laws, or perhaps send them a greeting, which they bring to a lovely little room when you lose yourself in the activity of the infusion of tiny animals under a microscope, when you rush to help someone in danger of burning or drowning without considering the danger that you yourself are risking, then indeed you don't think of yourself, you forget yourself. But do you exist only when you think of yourself? And then you dissipate when you forget yourself? Do you exist only through self-consciousness? Who doesn't forget himself constantly? Who doesn't lose sight of himself thousands of times in an hour? This self-forgetfulness, this losing of oneself, is for us only a mode of self-enjoyment. It is only the pleasure we take in our world, in our property, i.e. world pleasure. And so to this extent, I think it will just be kind of a 0 point, a base level, which it's sayable only insofar as it expresses the limit of sayability. There isn't, unless a consciousness, when you sort of realize that you're not going to adequate yourself to universals, you're condemned to this singularity. Then the point I think for Stirner is it opens up a new process of negotiating with the world in knowledge of that, rather than constantly trying to adequate oneself to identities which are infinite tasks which can never fully be constructed precisely in that manner.
Right. Well, Alexandra?
You just explained to us the unique as something unconceptible and unexplainable. And there was a part in Stirner's article about words, and I'd like to ask about Stirner's philosophy, how it relates to the concept of power of language or naming. And I just remembered then I read Judith Butler, but it was quite a long time ago, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But she explained about the moment when someone trying to name you somehow or call you, and then you just trapped in this relationship of powers, in this toxic relationship. At the moment then you react to the naming, and then your mind or ego just splits in two parts, one of which is more fluid and changeable. And again, here I see this relation to Stirner. Then he says that you can change this unique all the time, but another part is more like constant, and this part starts to judge another part and torture it in very cruel way, and you just trapped in this relationship. And even then you understand them and can reflect on this, you again and just more and more you just continue this relationship of power all the time. You use the language, the naming, the concepts. I could be wrong because it's more than 2 years since I read this book.
Thank you, Alexandra. Let's see what Adam has to say about that.
I mean, they say of the unique names, namely not. I mean, in terms of the power of, I mean, in terms of the Hegelian context that Stirner was working in, which, and Hegel, of course, forms a lot of Judith Butler's work. Language is a tool for mediating particular experiences by using them as universals, and kind of sticking particular experiences to universals. I mean, the opening of Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit is trying to deal with this problem of immediacy. So the problem of immediacy is this. It's a problem of trying to have the most pure experience of objects whatsoever. When you don't try and mediate them, you don't try and do anything to them, you just try and take the object as it is, this thing here and now. It's kind of unsayable because everything is this thing here and now. And so as soon as you even point it out or name it or try to describe it at all, you're using universals. And I think Stirner, I don't think Stirner's averse to language, but I think it's more of the school of thought that a map is useful and helpful insofar as one knows that it is ultimately wrong. Otherwise, if the map would completely match the territory, it would be the same size as it, and you would probably, be crushed by it or suffocate under it. And this, I think, is the suffocating power of categories, and particularly universal language. Insofar as the essences he's trying to reject, one of them is the human essence, which is, in Feuerbach's terms, something that which we have to become. We have to adequate ourselves to the perfection of God, which is actually the perfection of man as a human species. And the sort of rhetorical flourish of Stirner's entire book here is, well, I'm not the human species. I mean, I don't know about the capital H human, the capital M man. That guy can do what he wants, but why can't I? It is kind of this rhetorical flourish of the essence, the capital M man is no human, and therefore why we treat each other as essences rather than as humans. So he thinks that the violence we do to each other is because we treat each other in certain ways, not because of sort of a personal knowledge of each other or personal respect for each other or personal sort of love for each other, but because we see the category, the spirit, the spook in them. So I don't respect you, I respect the human being, capital H, in you. I respect the German in you, and stuff like that. That's what he's saying. And so there's a kind of violence there because it allows you to sort of commit atrocities. One of the key political arguments of Stirner, I think, which is really underrated, is that humanization and dehumanization mutually presuppose each other. In erecting a standard of the human, you have to exclude something of it. You have to exclude particular humans. There's a line in which he talks about the terror in the French Revolution. He says, for they love the human being so much that they cut the heads off of human beings. And this actually puts him in a very interesting conversation with particularly actually decolonial critiques of humanism. I don't know if anyone's read Aimé Césaire's great work, The Discourse on Colonialism. It's a book which says, at the end of humanism and philosophical renunciation stands Hitler. He thinks humanism and Hitlerism in Europe are very, close. And in terms of the rejection of humanism based on its abstract, violent universality, which it imprisons people within its kind of totalizing language, Stirner and Serres actually match up quite well on that. So I think that'd be quite interesting comparison in terms of their use of language, and as well with Butler, of course, as well, because there's the part of you which exceeds the concept, exceeds the language, and the barriers that language sets up for you in negotiating of the external world.
Mm-hmm. Before I give room to Zach, I want to ask you if you could expand a little bit on that. We were just saying, Adam, in regards to the sacred scruples, which is something that he talks about, Max Stirner, quite a bit on his book. What are these sacred scruples exactly?
They are just any fixed idea, any sort of regulatory principle which has been generally inculcated in us from the dominating objectivity. And so in Germany, it's going to be, morality in a very sort of strict sense of propositions of judgments, moral prohibitions. It's going to be fatherland and it's going to be faith. It's going to be the three Vichy ones, family, fatherland, and flag, something like that. It's going to be all the principles. It's going to be those things which he's going to reject. I mean, to arguably quite a comical level. So, I mean, so at the beginning, you said this book came out in 1845. They actually changed. It came out. It was in circulation about a year before that, but they made sure it was 1845 to escape the censors. And then the censors got a copy of this book, read it, and said, "This is far too absurd for anyone to revolt over it." And then just went, "Okay, you can let it out." It is a book in a long line of left Hegelian texts of being radically atheist. But the difference between these is that this one is also not a fan of radical atheists, insofar as they simply replace one essence with another. I mean, Ludwig Feuerbach, and he was one of the big ringleaders along with Bruno Bauer, literally says in one of his books, I think it's The Philosophy of the Future, or it's The Principles for a Future Philosophy, that we just need to rename Christianity. Because everyone really knows it's just human beings. And we just need to make that explicit, move it from the in itself to the for itself, and then we'll just wrap a revolution that way. To the extent to which some of these guys were actually saying, let's just rename the current order and make it a bit more explicit, and that would be the revolution, it was really determining its discourse here. And I have to say as well, this was written in the period in Germany known as the Vormers, before the 1848 revolutions. if anyone wants any idea of what the influence this book had and the other books of that sort of German sort of scene had in those revolutions, the answer is none. The revolutions were going on. These guys were all arguing. The main reception of this book is because it escaped into the anarchist scenes in the 1880s, and also Marx wrote an entire book responding to this one, and that's kind of where the sort of the legacy sort of jumps off.
Yeah, now Zach, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you for all of that. It's really wonderful stuff. So my interpretation of a lot of kind of Stirner's sort of foundational reasoning, talking about essentially the refutation of an identity and the kind of the affirmation of particulars. There's this sort of really very consistent and very very powerful and resonant sort of principle. I mean, not to use a word that he probably would have rejected, but what's interesting is that a lot of the places where he ends up in this kind of egoism seem to really reify the self and reify the ego. And we heard the phrase like a point in an empty field, right? So it's interesting to me that if you approach it from an epistemological perspective, you can kind of say, oh, well, any of these concepts, any of these identities are fundamentally faulty or fundamentally, to use a Buddhist terminology, and empty, right? But that he kind of, in some of his terminology, he actually lands on something that seems sort of uninterrogated. Now, I do want to kind of moderate that because your quote, after I raised my hand, from Stirner's critics is so powerful and seems to kind of complicate what I just said, where he actually says, okay, sure, but there's also this question of forgetting the self and what happens when you forget the self. So I wonder if a lot of that kind of egoism and that apparent kind of reification of the self is kind of what like Wittgenstein or even like Buddhism would say is kind of remedial, in the sense of it's like, well, if we live too much in a world of identities, we have to talk about particulars. But if we lived in a world of too much of particulars, we'd have to talk about identities, right? As we say, like, the actuality is ineffable, it's unsayable. And so all of the language that we're using is about remedying our current, sort of the current ways in which we think falsely and make ourselves unhappy, really, rather than sort of trying to affirm some truth, or at least some truth that can be conceptualized or spoken.
I think it's just worth talking about the ego for a little bit, actually, because the roots of why Stirner is saying egoism in this text is he doesn't. So, for example, I mean, so one of the big travesties, I guess, of the past 100. So since 1907, so this translation comes out in 2017. It's the first one since 1907. There are some correctives, but they all make the same mistake. They translate the Einzige, the unique, as the ego. Now, there is no Latin term ego. There is a German Ich. And with anything German, the Ich is going to have it can be a load-bearing Ich, load-bearing I. And I mean, if most German philosophy since Kant is just playing about with the nature of the I. And in a certain sense, does he ontologically substantiate it? Insofar as he makes a point of refusal, no. I mean, there's the last one, I think it's on the last page of the book, where he talks about just before we get to the section on the unique, where he's worried that people are going to identify him with the metaphysics which makes the I a universal thing. And so he's, and particularly the idea from Fichte. He says, Fichte's I is also the same essence outside me, because I is everyone, and if only this I has rights, then it is the I, but I am not it. I am not one I alongside other I's, but the sole I am unique. Now, this could be read solipsistically, as you said, from an epistemological point of view, but it is essentially, affirming this singular point of, whilst it's ineffable, but it's also the ground point of all our experience. There's just a fundamental mindness to our experience, because we exist until we don't. It is philosophically not very complex, because I think it is mostly trying to reject the need for a philosophical striation of our experience. In terms of the idea of reification of the ego, to make it a res, to make it a thing, I think that is the real problem for Stirner in terms of that's what he's trying to avoid, the thingification. He is much like Aimé Césaire. He says colonization equals thingification, the reduction of people to things. Thing, German Dinger, having a very sort of sense of an enclosed external existence. It's why he rejects property as things. Because he basically wants to melt away the hard barriers of objectivity or externality here. And so to make the ego a thing would also make it independent of one's immediacy, one's own experience of it. It's experienceable, but it's not communicable in the sense of you give yourself a concept and you completely map yourself out. It's that point which makes it a political refusal, I guess, rather than a purely conceptual one, because insofar as it has no conceptual content, the question has to shift from what does it mean to what does it do. And if it's constantly refusing to identify itself, and Stirner, in Stirner's critics, is refusing to identify himself. I mean, at one point, Feuerbach, and this is, I think, a really good aspect of continuing sort of the legacy of queer readings of Stirner, Feuerbach says, well, isn't your brain masculine? And Stirner says, no, fuck you. It's pretty much straight up says no, absolutely not. This does not. These categories are all essentially trying to, like water off a duck's back. He's basically trying to take that gambit of refusal to the highest point, both tactically and then. Is it epistemological? I think it is rejection of the epistemology of, do I need to know that I am myself? In a sense, he is rejecting. Insofar as he's also rejecting anthropology, and there's a text translated recently called "The Philosophical Reactionaries," which is a response to a critic of Stirner's, where he says that my main thing here, I want to reject anthropology, to give an account to fix humans beyond human beings, because then you start delineating what's outside of it, and bam, you get human beings are lovely, altruistic, holy, and you get the egoists and all these other things. The reason why I use the term egoist is because everyone else at the time is using egoist to mean the opposite of revolutionary or to mean the opposite of the good, even the atheists. Bauer's doing this to some extent, less so. Feuerbach definitely is. And it's also very much egoism in Hegelian. So it's also a very, because young Hegelianism, being a Hegelianism, was not an anti-racist movement. Bruno Bauer is most famous for writing one of the most anti-Semitic screeds, sort of known in Germany at that time. And in Hegelianism, they render Judaism as an egoistic religion. It's egoistic because it's particular, because it negotiates with the world. It doesn't. The affirmation of the egoist for Stirner is kind of a negative digging in to all the things that these other German intellectuals are rallying against. And to that extent, it is a negative move. Does it mean he's captured in a kind of dialectic there? I think insofar as the strategy is not to identify as the egoist, but to partake in a refusal, which sort of, leaves the egoist as a kind of like a trace. I think we go back to the question about Derrida earlier. I think that really sort of solidifies this project a bit more, which is, I guess, one of the sort of the annoying parts of the legacy of this book, because it's taken as a program rather than as the proverbial sort of the cat just pushing it. Like you have an image of a cat approaching a glass of water. Feuerbach says, this isn't rational, you can't do this, and the cat just does it anyway.
So Adam, would you mean then that this is a reaction in a way to when you're talking about Jewish people, to the chosen one, to the concept of like the idea of the chosen one or the chosen people?
No, what I mean is that insofar as the term egoism is being used in those Hegelian circles, it is used predominantly in a negative way, which defines that which is outside of the good, and it has usually, is particularly in the works of Bruno Bauer, strong anti-Semitic, and Hegel as well, anti-Semitic overtones. So just in the sense of where the term egoist would come from. And in so as he identifies with that, I wouldn't say he's trying to reclaim it, but he's trying to place himself outside of those very discourses. Some with varying, as I must say, levels of success. It's only the unique rejection of anthropology which gets him out of some of the worst parts of Stirner's style. Because this book is indetachable from Stirner's audience. Stirner's audience is young Hegelian anthropologists who have all been taught Hegel's philosophy of history, which of course is an incredibly racist text. And so there's like a paragraph or two in this book actually, where the first half, which is essentially him using Hegelian schemas of man to sort of show basically take the piss out of them. And he does end up replicating some of the worst parts of Hegelian racialism. And it's only the rejection of anthropology later on in the book that sort of stops him from carrying that forward. But nonetheless, that is something within Stirner's style which is constantly to be interrogated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in regards to solipsism, I think there is a section in the critiques that says something like, remaining in society is no less egoistic than staying in it. I think this is, I can't remember the quote exactly. It is something like, it's talking about solipsism and also retreat. And I think he also makes that kind of distinction between staying or kind of choosing to retreat. And he says it's no less egoistic to retreat than to stay, because ulteriorly, I guess, there are these motivations that are ultimately egoistic.
Yeah. So is it? I think I found a quote here actually. Should I read it out?
I think it's something like that.
Yeah. Do I become an egoist like this by fleeing from people?
Yes.
Sorry. But meanwhile, some have prepared their own depiction of egoism, think about of simply isolation. But what in the world does egoism have to do with isolation? Yeah. If I isolate myself, it's because I no longer find pleasure in society. But if I instead I remain among people, it's because they still offer me a lot. Remaining is no less egoistic than isolating oneself. Yeah. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Maxim?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to be brief. It's very hard to speak briefly because it's so interesting, and we can continue this on Discord. I would be happy to continue the conversation, but yeah, Zach said that a point in empty space, how does it connect to Buddhism? It's very interesting, I think, because Buddhism is kind of just empty space without a point. It's a very different rhetoric. But for Stirner, there is this point that it's constantly evading our grasp, which is kind of similar to Buddhism, but it works in a very different way, because for Buddhism, the point is the dissolution of the point itself. So it's interesting. And then Alexander was talking about Judith Butler. I haven't read Judith Butler, but from what you said, it sounds very similar to Lacan, the idea of language taking control of us. And yeah, by the way, I'm not criticizing Stirner in any negative way. He is brilliant. It's like he's making this rhetorical charge that is super powerful, super strong, and brilliant, and then he just hits the wall. And then we see what the wall is, because if we weren't so powerfully charging at it, we would kind of, like Ayn Rand would never get us into this kind of deep philosophy as Stirner does. But with Stirner, when we get this to the extreme, then when we see that, yes, like for example, language is not something that I own. Like I can say English, I can speak English. I can say English is my language. That doesn't make any sense, because I haven't invented any words. I haven't invented rules of grammar. I haven't invented my name. I mean, I can change the name, but it's kind of not what we want as this absolute egoist. So Alexander was talking, again, it sounded similar to Lacan, even if I haven't read Judith Butler, and just it follows from Hegel that yes, Stirner would not have an answer to that, obviously. That's the limit of his rhetoric, and it's great because now we see that this limit exists, and it's something very interesting that we wouldn't think about otherwise. And yeah, I would be really happy to continue this on Discord, but I'm gonna wrap it up now. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxime. No, we'll surely continue it. Now, Rin?
I just had a question, or I just wanted to double check if I understood everything, or what the unique and the egoism and all that is. How I understand the unique and the perspective of egoism and the individual anarchism is being able to hold self-determination and autonomy against more hegemonic domination that usually comes from the binary thinking or values of morality, similar to what Derrida critiqued against logocentrism. So I don't think, I was wondering if it's, I don't know. I think one of the previous questions was talking about how egoism means like claiming things for yourself, or like this is mine and this is me and something like that. But I was thinking more like just making decisions for yourself, or trying to reject certain kind of hegemonic like internalization, or like certain influxes of like various thoughts and ideas that are hegemonic basically. But I don't know if that's the right understanding of what I read.
Yeah, I think the word interiorization is actually spot on. So believing this book, but let's let Adam talk about that.
No, I totally agree. It's the interiorization of hegemonic ideologies or hegemonic devices which regulate our embodied existence is ultimately going to be the thing which Stirner wants to sort of break us out of by presenting them to us. And it's not just an intellectual thing, it's also a physical thing of just not necessarily indulging in raw hedonism. I mean, he says this kind of jokingly at one point, I think, you know, a quick jerk shakes me of the thoughts. You know, he just like says a hop, skip, and a jump gets me out of this a little bit. Sort of, you know, being thrown, just having water thrown on you or something. But there is a what I mean is there an embodied aspect to resistance, and in extent we are always already, to an extent, not necessarily resisting domination, but exceeding the categories it imposes upon us. And particularly going back to, it says that the idea of internalizing of ideas, and going back to the point about language. There's an interesting quote actually on page 196 of The Unique and Its Property PDF, where Stirner says, you know, now I know what I'm supposed to do, and the new catechism must be written. Sorry, can be written. Again, the subject is subservient to the predicate, the individual to something universal. Rule is again protected by an idea, and the foundation of a new religion made. This is, however, this is a step forward in the religious and especially Christian realm, and not a step beyond it. Here he's talking about these kind of atheists who want to replace Christianity with the higher idea of humanity. But he says the step beyond that he needs to take is, he says, quote, the step beyond leads into the unspeakable. For me, miserable language has no word, and the word, the logos, is for me a mere word. It is essentially going to be the rejection of this logocentric idea, and even going back to the other translation of logos away from word, which is account, and the idea of, to take a sort of a title from the Judith Butler book, to give an account of oneself. Question is, who is asking for that account? Why do I need to give an account? You know, what is providing me with an account of myself as, say, a good German, as a Christian? Where are these things coming from? How have I internalized them? And to what extent are they causing me to direct my finite time on this earth to achieving ends which are universal, and not only universal, but fundamentally you can't reach them. You'll never be beatified. You'll never you will never embody human essence, because you've already got humanity. You are already human. And it's the very particularity, the abnormality, as I put it in that sort of text we attached, the uniqueness defined as an anarchic abnormality, which renders it both so horrific to these ideal, to these hegemonies, and also provides the way out. Because the egoist, the anarchic, is presented as a kind of sickness in Stirner, and he sort of fully affirms it, whilst also trying to destabilize the binary that renders him sick. I mean, when he's critiquing socialism in this text, we have to remember it's not Marxist socialism, it's not materialism. He's talking about people like Wilhelm Weitling. Wilhelm Weitling was a socialist in Germany who liked to talk about socialism as kind of moving away from a model of punishing wrongs, but treating them as social ills to be cured. And there's like a good proto-Foucauldian. Stirner is like, these two are basically the same. They're just replaced with one hegemonic ideology of the other, which denies our self-arrangement in favor of an arrangement from above. And this also feeds into the distinction that Stirner puts out between insurrection. So in Germany, he sometimes uses insurrection, but also uses the term Empörung, which is revolt. He says that revolution replaces one on top, one with the other. Insurrection allows us to organize ourselves. Let me see if I can get that quote up, actually. Revolution for Stirner is literally a kind of literal revolution. It is going to be something akin... here we go. This is page 328. Revolution and insurrection should not be looked upon as synonymous. The former consists in a radical change of conditions, of the prevailing condition or status, the state or society, and is therefore a political or social act. The latter indeed has a transformation of conditions as its inevitable result, but doesn't start from it, but from the discontent of human beings with themselves. It is not an armed uprising, it is not an armed uprising, but a rising up of individuals, a getting up without regard to the arrangements that spring from it. The revolution is aimed at new arrangements, whilst the insurrection, in Purung in German, leads us to no longer let ourselves be arranged, but rather to arrange ourselves, and sets no radiant hopes on institutions. It is not a fight against the established, since if it prospers, the established will collapse of itself. It is only a working of my way out of the established. If I leave the established, it is dead and falls into decay. Since now my aim is not the overthrow of the established order, but my rising up above it, so my intention and action are not a political or social intention and action, but since they are directed solely towards me and my ownness, an egoistic intention and action. And I'll just skip forward a little bit. The insurrectionist strives to become constitutionless, and he means that in a double sense of without a fundamental or constituent power, and also without constitution. I do not have to belong to this community by virtue of my lovely human essence, my Germanness. It is because people get together to empower each other through this without such pretenses of delineating them by means of concepts or essences.
I think now, Adam, we have 20 minutes left, but so we leave some space for questions. But I would like you to, we did talk about it yesterday, and on this text about Etienne de la Boétie on voluntary servitude. So I would like you to offer your kind of interpretation of this and why Max Stirner would probably not agree with the concept of voluntary servitude and why people submit to higher orders regardless of themselves and their wishes.
Yeah, so there's been a recent turn to read Stirner as a thinker of involuntary servitude. Voluntary servitude, where you willingly sort of subject yourself, disavow yourself entirely on behalf of serving like a tyrannical power. And this has mostly come about through the work of a really great scholar of Stirner, Saul Newman. I think he's based over at Goldsmiths. But this particular paper he writes is in a collection called Max Stirner, and he sort of thinks Stirner is a thinker of a critique of voluntary servitude. He thinks we are voluntarily servile, and he thinks that this, and his reading of Stirner thinks that this is because we're all secretly just embedded with religious modes of thinking, and if we critique the religious modes of thinking, then bam, we're out of it. My problem is that this is an over-intellectualizing endeavor, which leads us into the problem before of constantly trying to intellectually purge oneself of religion, and it's not really it's not a Stirner position. It's a sort of position he's trying to get away from, but also because there is no voluntary servitude, I think, for Stirner. There is only for him involuntary and sort of conscious egoism. So involuntary egoism, in the term in German, is unfreiwilliger Egoismus, unfree-willing egoism. It's still a willing ego, it's just unfree-willing. It's something which I think is best translated in context, in way you use it, as subjected egoism. It's egoism as a kind of the constant force of being alive and pursuing oneself as a living agent that has been redirected to serving something else. This is why his main critiques of sort of altruism, and altruism is a very anachronistic term to use here. It's translated as that in the book, but there's a good work by a guy called Tim Dowdall who's just finished his PhD thesis on this, the altruism isn't really a concept at the time Stirner's writing. It doesn't really make it into Germany. It's something that arrives from, I think it's Baron de Holbach in France. Doesn't quite reach Germany at this point. But his critique of those claiming to you, I'm just serving the higher ideal, I'm disavowing myself. Come on. No, his whole thing is, come on, really? You're not getting any gratification from this. It's fine to get gratification from this. You're not going to completely disavow yourself because you're not a concept. You're not a principle. You're an individual, nameless and with a finite, unspeakably particular and your own and abnormal to any concept may capture you, partaking in your finite existence on this earth and spending your time in this way rather than other. It's still an egoism, just a subjective one. So for Stirner, it's not a question of we voluntarily serve and in doing so have no participation in it. Rather, I mean, for Stirner, we are to some extent complicit in our own subjection, but not in a sense of moralizing our way out of it, more in a sense of we're complicit in it insofar as there's something being subjected and it has to capture us some way. It's very rudimentary in that sense. It's very close to, and Jakob Blumenfeld puts this interestingly in his book on Stirner, closer to Spinoza's idea of conatus, just the pursuit of empowerment of anything existing by virtue of its continued existence as the thing which it is. I have problems with that reading because I think it's Spinoza a bit too axiomatic, but for all intents and purposes, it does capture the idea pretty well. But yeah, I don't. There's not really much, not so much voluntary servitude in Stirner, so much as there is subjected egoism, subjected will, which is used to sort of empower and reproduce various social orders.
Yes. Would anyone like here to ask a question about that? Add anything from the readings or interpretations? I would like to open it a little bit. Selma. Selma, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. So I was saying that I'm new to Stirner and trying to grasp these ideas. So I guess I have a question about voluntary servitude and egoism. So we kind of talked about how you have freedom to on how to spend your finite life. Well, don't you then have like infinite choices? And isn't that kind of anxiety inducing? So then wouldn't that be where voluntary servitude comes in, and you, in your self-interest, you want to then, it becomes in your self-interest and in the central I to then like voluntarily believe in like a higher power or something? Or is that like egoism? Is that like choosing something? No, I'm just trying to like kind of understand. So that's kind of a question, kind of not. Can you clear that up a little bit? I don't know.
Oh, sure. I mean, so Stirner has a very interesting view of freedom. For him, freedom is just purely negative. It's freedom from other things. It's he thinks it's something we don't ultimately want. It's a bit too abstract. Yeah, I want to be free from this, free from that, but we want to keep. There has to be sort of decision to maintain, not, yeah, essentially not to get rid of everything. He thinks freedom itself is just a very sort of negative abstraction. But in terms of your actual sort of question, which is, yeah, if we get rid of all of these desires, what do we choose after this? We try and purge ourselves of all this. What do we do? I think this is one of the problems of Stirner, particularly when read as this existential kind of theorist, because he doesn't tell you what to do. It's the question of you have to sort of stop doing. You have to do own criticism and work out what's dominating you. I guess because what can you push up against? What are you going to? What is dominating? What is dominating you? What is pushing against you? And obviously, we have too many choices. We can do so much, but to that extent, I think that is the limit of this book. And when he doesn't really write a sequel to this, I think that is kind of the disappointment, I guess, of Stirner, is that he just gives you strategies of refusal and doesn't give you a program going forward. He even says this in the book. He says, I don't quite care about the future of this. He's not giving anything sort of a banner. I think insofar as finding strategies of refusal, I think then what he's doing in refusing the philosophy of giving principles or ethical standards, he's doing a move similar to what Kant does. So Kant famously says in his Critique of Pure Reason that his job is to restrict knowledge in order to make room for faith. Stirner is trying to restrict philosophy in order to make room for politics, and he's just not going to give a I mean, this is why he's he has such an affinity these days with people in sort of anarchists like Tikkun and the like, who don't really want to give a constituent vision and just completely open up the space, blow it open, and also we'd have to question us, what do we want? And then it becomes a very frightening, very risky question. But that sort of anarchy is, to quote Catherine Malibu, it's pleasurable because it's risky, and risky because it's pleasurable. I'm sorry if that's an unsatisfying answer, but it's an unsatisfying book in terms of any kind of prescriptions one may get from it.
I think that's a very good approximation, actually. Alexandra?
There was a line there. Stirner tries to compare and explain the union of egoists, and he compares it to the way how children organize themselves to play. And I'll try to explain. It's a while since I see the subject of my work, the architecture, as a very like a type of dictatorship of a person, because it fixes how you act in particular places, how you feel in particular spaces in city or in interior, and so on. And I was thinking about the article of Christopher Alexander, because I still haven't found the decision how architecture could be more liberal type of art. And there was an article, City is Not a Tree, by Christopher Alexander, and he also compares he explains that modern cities are more tree-structured and very hierarchical places, and this not correspond to the way society is naturally works. And it's instead of tree structure, he argues for semi-lattice structure, and he also says that this is more like the way children trying to play very spontaneously inside of the city in any place. He says that playgrounds it's the tyranny over the childhood, it's the bad thing. The nature is more about the spontaneous play. And here I see the parallels, and I was interested if you know any other sources I can read about more materialistic way of explanation of these unions, or how people can organize the spaces, and any kind of information.
So in terms of like secondary literature on Stirner, a lot of the good stuff is annoyingly in German and not translated. But in terms of secondary stuff on Stirner that's published these days, I mean, my work won't be out for some time. Jakob Blumenfeld's book is probably the best book on this. Jakob's work, I mean, he's a sort of a Marxist scholar by trade, really sort of a communization theorist, sort of a post sort of autonomous kind of tradition. So basically, it's slightly more libertarian, less top-down, inflected, libertarian sort of the anarchist sense, left anarchist sense versions of Marxism. His book, All Things Are Nothing to Me, which you can find PDFs of, that's probably one of the closest.
Sorry to interrupt you, Adam, but so everybody knows, I did share the PDF. It's on the Google Drive, so you can have a look.
in terms of the organization of space itself, I mean, page 229 of the uniqueness property is quite good on that, about the stuff about the rooms holding each other in common, his definition of society as an architectural grouping. I mean, in terms of the idea of, I guess, the kind of anti-architecture, there's also a good book, which isn't on Stirner, which is called George Bataille Against Architecture. And I think there's a lot of commonality between the two there, but there's not much on Stirner that's really out. That's honestly a lot of it's pretty crap, to be honest. The Byington translation of Einstein's ego has kind of set the field back for quite some time.
There is other secondary literature as well that I would recommend. Probably Adam wouldn't agree with it very much because it is a different spin. But it's Stirner. There's one by Federico Campagna on Stirner, Junger, and Fernando Pessoa. And that's a quite good paper. I don't know if that will be helpful for you, Alexandra, as I understand that what you're asking is slightly more, in a way, practical, or but perhaps. And there is also one by Federico. I can send that. It's a podcast about architecture itself and the concept of the domos that might also relate to this. But I think, yeah, that's actually fantastic that we got to the union of egoists, because it was probably the last point I wanted to ask Adam to elaborate. But
can I ask you to write the name of the author?
Yes, I'll write it in a moment. Yes. Anyways, I can send it to you directly, if anything. Are you on Discord, Alexandra?
Not yet, but I will join.
Oh, okay. Yes. If they send, I will ask you to send you the invitation. So yeah, on the union of egoists. And what's the relationship? Because there is one text that I shared with everyone, Adam, on Bataille. I think that would be probably the relationship between Bataille's work and Stirner. I would like to hear a little bit about that before we depart.
So in my work, I bring Bataille and Stirner together and also point out their divergence. The reason why I bring them together is because they're both running from the same monster, in a sense. They're both trying to affirm an unnameable, non-conceptual precondition of all hierarchy, which split things up into the good and the bad, the ideal and the real. And that's why I think there's a commonality between the concept of uniqueness in Stirner and base matter in Bataille. There's also, Bataille is a thinker who thinks a lot about, he's rather than thinking about so essentially he is a thinker of energetics, the energy that composes living things, and the primary aspect of the economy of energy in the cosmos for Bataille is loss. Loss is inevitable. You know, you can try and hold in your excrement for as long as possible, but then you'll die, and guess what will happen? It is a very Bataille is a very, I mean, he writes a text called the Solaranus, for God's sake. It is a principle of loss as the fundamental principle, and sovereignty for Bataille is taking hold of the inevitability of loss, what he calls the accursed share, and not doing things purely for a standard of utility. And I think that matches up a lot with Stirner's idea of self-enjoyment as the squandering of life. He uses the term squandering. In German, the term is pretty much the same as well. There are some strong distinctions, though, when it comes to politics. They're both trying to escape totalizing systems which try to map out knowledge of the human, but at the same time, Bataille is very much an anthropologist, or influenced by the anthropologists of the 20th century, late 19th century, Marcel Mauss, people like that. And the politics of Bataille's project is very much the opposite of Stirner's. Whilst they're both, to an extent, anti-capitalist thinkers, Bataille and Stirner really divulge on this idea of the sacred. So for Bataille, the sacred is that which is created by this fundamental principle of loss. You know, when you sacrifice the animal and you don't eat it, that loss therefore creates something sacred. God, in the form of Jesus, becomes dead, becomes a sacred object because of this loss. Whereas, you know, the sacredness is produced by consumption and loss for Bataille. For Stirner, it's the opposite. The sacred is that which you can't touch because it's sacred. And the politics of that play themselves out in a very interesting manner. So Bataille, those who know, was one of the founding members of a cult called Asafal, wanted to make the kind of a Nietzschean anti-fascist, anti-capitalist kind of religion. And it had two front groups. It had the journal, Asafal, and the project, the public face of it that was apart from the journal, which was called the College of Sociology. And the political advocacy they had was summed up in a great paper called The Winter Wind, delivered by Roger Caillois, most famous for his work on games, actually. But in that text, he sort of has a critique of Stirner, and he says, look, our project is this. We're going to do an inverted Stirnerism. Rather than attack the sacred, we're going to make everything sacred and therefore hyper-socialize everything. And this is where it gets a little bit, to use a technical term, batshit. What they wanted to do was they wanted to create a vanguard cult of an order of communist monks to spread across the world and therefore be a vanguard for communism. That's where Stirner and Bataille defeat themselves, because they read Stirner as fundamentally opposed to the sacred, whereas they are very much pro it, even though they have a very similar metaphysical outlook on individuality and how, the expenditure of life. But nonetheless, there are some interesting resonances there insofar as one wants to escape totalizing systems. And we don't need to be too philosophical about it. I mean, escaping a totalizing system of knowledge which sets the limits of one's experience of the world, despite, in spite of the brute desire to escape it, is also the same problematic that Mark Fisher encounters in capitalist realism. How to escape a totalizing system of thought which delimits you in advance, and finding pathways of desire, and as Mark Fisher once said, our desire is nameless, that really try to tend out of that. And so in terms of the escaping of totality after totality has been constructed, for both Bataille and Stirner, the totality is Hegel. To escape this system of absolute knowledge, to disappear into non-knowledge or unknowing, as Bataille calls it, or the unspeakable, as Stirner calls it, really unites their two impulses, even if they take it in opposite directions. Stirner is not going to provide a cult or monastic order. He's going to provide a union of egoists, which is essentially a mutual association in which one tries to negotiate with the other as if for the first time, because one understands that one treats them with a fundamental kind of mutuality, and it tends towards this kind of mutualism, but ultimately it is trying to find a new way of encountering the other and being empowered by the other and empowering them without doing that on the basis of a criterion of identifying them. Not respecting the identity in them, but respecting them, which is the real anarchic challenge of not commanding the other to a sort of standard of recognition or to giving an account of themselves, but in working together collectively for the best use of the finite time we have upon this earth as it's constantly flowing away from us, which might be unsatisfying as a project, but that's the challenge. Risky because pleasurable because risky.
Excellent, Adam. And to finish, because I'm conscious of time, we have 5 minutes left only, and I would like to leave some space for people as well. In terms of Stirner and his union of egoists, as almost an anecdote, could you tell us about the farm? What was his experience of uniting?
So whilst he was very critical of Bruno Bauer, they were mates. And so if people read the front of this book, the dedication, the book is dedicated to his second wife, so Mary Dernhardt, who was of a rich sort of heiress. And she gave Stirner basically took her inheritance, all of her money, and he started a milk cooperative, sort of an anarchist milk cooperative in Berlin with Bruno Bauer. They forgot to advertise it. They thought people would just show up because, anarchist milk cooperative, we've already got rid of the ideals of the state. No one bought it. They poured it down the drain. Marie Dernhardt left to England, then Australia, and never spoke to him again. The biographer of Max Stirner, John Henry Mackay, went to go speak to her. She says, I don't want to speak to that man. I never loved him. Bye. So Stirner wasn't very good at economics. He translated Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, famously, It was a very standard edition, but he was not very good at economics or implementing his own ideas because his idea was to not have any, I guess. But no, to not have any positive program other than the negotiation. And negotiations fail. That's why we got to be cybernetic about it. But yeah, after a couple of stints in debtor's prison on top of that, that's kind of the tragedy of the milk, I guess, in Stirner.
Well, thank you. That's a fun thing, a fun fact to finish. If anyone else has anything else to add before we leave, please do it now. We still have, of course, Discord, and you can contact me and Adam directly. But yeah, I don't see any hands. Nothing. Okay, well, let's leave it there then for now. I hope we can all continue really with the conversation. It's amazing. And I would like also to hear from everyone, because you have such amazing and diverse backgrounds, that, yeah, it would be very enriching for us too. So please stay in touch, and I shall see you next Saturday. Thank you, Adam.
Cheers, everyone.
Yeah.
Great to be here.
Thank you. It was
Thank
very
you.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to tell everyone, please, that a bit later, sign upon your presentations, because we will have recorded presentations in group. So I'm putting the texts that are on the syllabus in the sheet. So and you can put your names there to form groups and do these presentations, these group presentations. That's it. Thank you all for the beautiful presentations. Bye-bye.